The Galactic Council had not felt fear in 400 years. Not since the Vorkai collapse, when 3 star systems folded inward like dying flowers and took 11 billion souls with them, had the council chambers on Thessavane Station trembled with genuine uncertainty. The architecture of the station itself was designed to prevent panic. Smooth curved walls of bioluminescent coral stone. Gravity calibrated to a gentle 0.7 standard. The air even had small amounts of a soothing chemical that the Thessavane engineers had secretly added to the ventilation system without telling anyone or getting approval. Councillor Urethsan of the Dovari people sat in her assigned seat, a curved shell of living amber shaped by decades of her body's specific weight and warmth, and felt for the first time in her long career that the calming alkaloid was not enough. She had 4 eyes. 2 faced forward. 2 faced slightly to the side, an evolutionary inheritance from ancestors who once hunted across open salt flats and needed to see threats approaching. The fleet had positioned itself at the outer edge of what the Council officially called the sovereignty threshold, the unseen line that marked the limits of Council control, where their authority ended and the wild began. Calling a supernova a bright event would be technically accurate and spiritually bankrupt. These were not ships in any architectural language the Council's combined 12,000 years of recorded spacefaring had produced. They were geometrically impossible. Not in the fraudulent way of certain Quellian art pieces that merely appeared impossible through clever perspective. They were truly impossible to understand, measurable and verifiable impossibilities. Their shapes looked different depending on the sensor frequency you used, as if the ships were in more dimensions than our tools could see. The humans launched them 14 months ago, said fleet analyst Corvith, a Dovari like Urethsan but younger, his amber shell seat still factory smooth. We did not detect the launches. Silence. We did not detect them, Urethsan repeated. Not a question. The information was absorbed slowly. Correct. Our deep field arrays registered nothing. No propulsion signatures. No mass displacement. No thermal output. We only became aware of them when a Quellian merchant freighter in the Kashan Drift reported visual confirmation. By that point, the fleet had already passed through 3 monitored transit corridors without triggering a single alert. The chamber held 42 seats. 39 were occupied. The 3 empty seats belonged to species currently in mourning cycles, a cultural obligation the Council honored absolutely. In that moment, Urethsan envied the absent delegates their solitude. Where are they now? Asked Delegate Fuan of the Merrath, his voice translated through a resonance collar since Merrath communication was primarily vibrational, felt in the chest more than heard by the ear. Corvith adjusted the projection. The fleet had positioned itself at the outer edge of what the Council officially called the sovereignty threshold, the unseen line that marked the limits of Council control, where their authority ended and the wild began. They were not inside. They were not outside. They were on the line, as if the human commanders understood exactly where that line was, which they should not have because the sovereignty threshold's precise coordinates were among the most classified data in Council archives. They are waiting, Corvith said. For what? Asked Fuan. Nobody answered because nobody knew, and the alkaloid in the air had stopped working entirely. Her name was Commander Elena Vasquez, and she had not slept in what her body's clock estimated was 9 days. This was not heroism. It was not discipline. It was a side effect of the ship itself, the Umbra Rahl, her flagship, the lead vessel of the 47, which generated a field effect that subtly the disruption of the human circadian rhythm was noted, documented, and formally complained about by her engineers, who ultimately accepted it because there was no practical solution that did not require dismantling the core architecture of the dark matter containment system. Elena had read those complaints. She had signed them. She had written a personal note to Chief Engineer Delgado that read, "I know. I'm sorry. It will get better after deployment." It had not gotten better after deployment. She stood at the bridge's observation aperture, not a window in the traditional sense since traditional windows implied that the thing you were looking through was a barrier between inside and outside, and on the Umbra Rahl the relationship between inside and outside was more of a philosophical position than a physical fact, and looked at the stars. They looked wrong. This was also expected. The dark matter drive didn't move the ship through space the way conventional drives did. Conventional drives pushed. The dark matter drive. Elena always paused here in her own mind because the official terminology was Vasquez-Okafor Differential Compression System, named partially for her and partially for Dr. Amara Okafor, who had died 3 years before the first successful test, and the name felt like both an honor and a bruise. The dark matter drive compressed the relevance of the space between origin and destination. That was not the technical description. The technical description was 70 pages long and required fluency in 4 separate mathematical frameworks. But it was how Elena thought of it. You did not travel from A to B. You made the distance between A and B matter less, and then you were at B, and the stars looked subtly wrong because your brain was trying to reconcile a journey it had not experienced with an arrival it could not dispute. "They're scanning us again," said Lieutenant Marcus Webb from the sensor station. Marcus had the particular quality of delivering alarming information in the tone of someone narrating a nature documentary, calm, curious, and faintly delighted. Elena had promoted him 3 times for exactly this quality. How many frequencies? All of them more or less. I count responses from at least 9 distinct sensor architectures, which suggests at least 9 different species running independent scans. Could be more. Some of these signature patterns overlap in ways that might be 2 species sharing a platform or 1 species with a really eclectic engineering philosophy. Are we giving them anything? Whatever they can read. He paused. Which isn't much. The dark matter containment shell is scattering about 83% of incoming signals. They're getting our outline and not much else. Elena turned from the aperture. The bridge crew, 14 people, all of them sleep-deprived, all of them carrying the specific quiet dignity of people engaged in something they did not yet fully understand, went about their work without looking at her directly. Not from intimidation. From respect. There was a difference, and Elena had spent 20 years learning to cultivate one and extinguish the other. "Send the greeting package," she said. Webb looked up. "The full package? Music, mathematics, the historical summary?" "The full package." She paused. "And add my personal message at the end." "The one you wrote at Lagrange point 7? That one." Webb nodded and turned back to his console. Elena returned to the aperture. Outside, in the strange, wrong-looking starfield, the 46 other ships of her fleet held their positions with a patience that was not mechanical, each vessel crewed by humans who were also not sleeping, also staring at wrong stars, also carrying the weight of what they had built and what they had come here to say. The greeting package took 11 seconds to transmit. It contained, among other things, a single sentence in 712 languages, every language catalogued in the Council's own public diplomatic database, which the humans had apparently been reading cautiously, that translated, in all 712 versions, to the same thing. "We did not come to threaten. We came because we are afraid and we thought you should know why." The translation arrived instantly. The Council's linguistic systems were, if nothing else, genuinely excellent. And for a long moment after the 712 versions of the message had resolved into readable text on every delegate's personal display, no one spoke. Yureth-san read it 4 times. With all 4 eyes. "We did not come to threaten. We came because we are afraid and we thought you should know why." "It's a manipulation," said Delegate Voss of the Quellian Compact, predictably. Voss was old even by Quellian standards, which meant he was old in an absolute sense that transcended metaphor. He had survived the Council's last 3 major diplomatic crises and was more convinced than ever that all unexpected communication was an attack or a prelude to one. "They show us ships we cannot scan and then tell us they are afraid. The fear framing is designed to disarm us." "Or they are afraid," said a quieter voice. Everyone looked toward Delegate Sol of the Hethany. The Hethany were small. Their average adult stood at about the height of a Dovari child. And Sol in particular had a quality of physical stillness that caused delegates to sometimes forget she was present until she spoke. She had the most sophisticated intelligence network of any delegate on the Council, and she never mentioned this. "The Hethany position," Voss said, with a particular inflection that meant your species is naive and this is a recurring problem, "has historically leaned toward charitable interpretation." "The Hethany position," Sol replied with no inflection at all, "has historically been correct." She let that settle. "The personal message. Has anyone reviewed it yet?" Corvith pulled it up. It was longer than the greeting, several hundred words translated from a human language called English into Council Standard, and he read it aloud because the chamber's acoustic design made group reading difficult when everyone's display was positioned differently. It began. "My name is Elena Vasquez. I am the commanding officer of this fleet and the co-developer of the propulsion system that brought us here. Before we proceed, let me assure you that building these ships was the most solitary accomplishment of my life. We did not build them as weapons. We built them because 4 years ago, we detected something at the edge of our solar system. Something that our best instruments could not identify and our best scientists could not explain. Something that was, we believe, watching us. We do not know if it was a natural phenomenon. We do not know if it was alive. We do not know if it has intentions. What we know is this: it is still there. And it has been moving, slowly, in a direction that does not lead away from us. We built these ships because we needed to be able to run if it became necessary. We are at your border because we are asking, formally, for your help in understanding what we found. We think wars start when people hide their fear and pretend to be stronger than they are. We are not pretending. Corvus stopped reading. The chamber was quiet in a different way than before. The first silence had been the silence of threat assessment. This silence was something older and harder to name, the silence of people who have been handed a piece of information that refuses to be filed into any existing category. Urethsan's second left eye, the one that faced slightly toward the chamber's curved wall, caught a reflection of Delegate Voss. He was not speaking. His expression, a Quellian expression not easily readable by non-Quellians, but Urethsan had been doing this for 30 years, was the expression of a very old creature confronting the possibility that one of his fundamental assumptions might be wrong. Something watching them, Delegate Fuin said finally, his resonance collar translating the vibration of something that was not quite words in Merath, more of a low sustained frequency that the collar rendered as, from where? That, said Sol, is the right question. Elena had named it the stillness. Not officially. Officially it was called Anomaly Event 7 Garin, a name given by the Astrophysics Division at the United Earth Science Consortium, which had a habit of naming strange cosmic events as if they were just organizing files. But Elena had been the one standing in the observation room at Ganymede Station when the first confirmed readings came in, and she had felt, in a way that had nothing to do with instruments or analysis, that stillness was the right word. It did not move like other things. Things in space moved because of gravity, momentum, and propulsion. The stillness moved the way a thought moves, without announcing itself, without leaving evidence of its passage, simply arriving at a new position in a way that made the previous position feel like a misremembering. Dr. Okafor had been the first to propose that it was not a thing at all in the conventional sense. Not a ship, not a body, not a cloud of particles or a gravitational lens or a quantum fluctuation scaled beyond ordinary parameters. She had written in her last published paper, 11 months before her death, "We may be observing a process rather than an object. A verb rather than a noun. The question of what it is may be less productive than the question of what it does." What it was doing, as far as anyone could determine, was watching. Elena pulled up the compiled data on her personal terminal, the real data, not the sanitized briefing package she had transmitted to the Council. The real data was harder to look at. Not because it was more alarming in obvious ways, but because it contained the thing that the briefing package had carefully omitted. The recordings from Ganymede Station 18 months ago, when the instruments had picked up something that the consortium's analysts had spent 6 months arguing about before finally, quietly, adding to the classified archive with a notation that read Nature Undetermined. Recommend ongoing monitoring. The instruments had picked up a response. Not a message. Not a signal in any encoding framework anyone recognized. More like, Elena had thought about this for 18 months trying to find the right comparison. More like the way a huge, very old animal turns its head when something small and new makes an unexpected sound in its territory. Not aggressive. Not communicative. Just aware. The stillness knew they had noticed it. And then it had begun its slow movement. Not toward them, not away from them, but around them, in a long curved arc that Elena's navigational team had charted and recharted and each time arrived at the same conclusion. If the arc continued, it would eventually complete a full circuit of the solar system. A full circuit that would take, at the stillness's current pace, approximately 60 years. Like it's measuring us, Chief Engineer Delgado had said, looking at the projected path. It's like walking the perimeter of something you're deciding whether to buy. Elena had not slept well after that. She pulled the data window closed and looked instead at the live feed from the fleet's external sensors. The Council Station, Thesavane, a name she had studied extensively, was visible as a cluster of light and mass at the edge of sensor range. She could see the scanning beams they were using, could track the density of their observation and could feel, in the same irrational but reliable way she had felt the word, stillness, was correct. That somewhere on that station people were reading her words and deciding what kind of being she was. She hoped she had told the truth clearly enough. Truth, in her experience, was not a simple thing to transmit. It was easy to state facts. It was much harder to convey the texture of facts, the weight of them, the way they felt when they arrived in the middle of the night and did not leave. She had tried. In the letter. She had tried to give them not just the information but the feeling of the information, because she needed them to understand not just what the stillness was but what it had done to the humans who knew about it. It had not made them aggressive. It had made them humble. That was the thing, the central, important, easily misunderstood thing, that she needed the Council to comprehend. There was a ceremony among the Dovari called the Sankelith, which translated roughly as, the naming of what cannot be fixed. It was performed at the end of wars, at the conclusion of famines, and after disasters that reshaped coastlines and erased cities. It was not a mourning ceremony. The Dovari had separate, elaborate mourning traditions that involved specific colors of light and particular harmonics of communal sound. The Sankelith was different. It was the ceremony for acknowledging that something had happened that could not be undone, could not be explained away, and could not be processed into a lesson that made the universe comprehensible again. You sat in a circle. You named the thing. You sat with the name in silence until the silence became bearable. That was all. Ureth-san had participated in Sankelith ceremonies 17 times in her life. Twice for wars. Once for the Kashan plague, which had moved through the Dovari homeworld's southern continent in the span of a single season and taken her younger sister, her sister's mate, and their 4 children. The other 14 times were for things smaller but no less real. The end of a relationship, the death of a mentor, the moment she understood that a political cause she had devoted a decade to was based on a foundational misunderstanding of the people it claimed to help. She sat in her amber shell seat and realized she was performing a private Sankelith right now. The thing she was naming, we are not the most watchful ones. The Council had been, for 400 years, the primary observers of the galaxy's organized life. Their sensor networks, their intelligence apparatus, their diplomatic reach, all of it was constructed on the foundational premise that if something significant was happening in the explored regions of space, the Council would know. Not immediately always. Not perfectly. But eventually, it was provided with sufficient detail to respond. The humans had detected something the Council had not. Not because the humans were better equipped. Not because they were cleverer or more advanced. By most technical metrics, Earth remained in the category the Council's formal taxonomy labeled developing civilizations, monitored status, which was a classification Ureth-san had always privately thought was condescending but had never successfully argued against in formal session. The humans had detected the stillness because it was near them. And the Council had not known about it. Which meant there was something significant happening in the monitored space that the Council's networks had missed, because it was moving quietly enough and strangely enough that only a civilization with a direct, intimate local view of the specific region could have noticed it. And if there was one such thing, Ureth-san stopped that thought before it completed. Not from denial. From discipline. You named one thing at a time. That was the Sankelith way. She opened a private channel to Sol. Are you thinking what I am thinking? She asked. Sol's response came quickly. The Hethany did not waste time on conversational preamble when substance was available. I am thinking that we should invite Commander Vasquez aboard the station, Sol said. And I am thinking that when we do, we should not do it as a diplomatic formality. We should do it because she has seen something we have not, and the worst possible response to that is to make her feel like a petitioner at a gate. Voss will object. Voss objects to everything that implies the universe is larger than his existing map of it. His objections are valuable because they force precision. They are not valuable as final decisions. Ureth-san felt something that on a human face might have produced a smile, a Dovari expression that involved a subtle repositioning of the secondary eyelids, invisible to most non-Dovari but meaningful among those who knew the language. I'll call the vote. Before you do, Sol said, read the last paragraph of her message again. The one she added after the main text. Ureth-san pulled up her display. The last paragraph was short. Read. I have a daughter. She is 7 years old and she has never left Earth's gravity well. She knows about the stillness because I could not look her in the eyes and keep something that large a secret. She asked me the night before I left if the people I was going to talk to would help us. I told her I hoped so. She said, tell them we'll help back. I'm telling you. Ureth-san's 4 eyes were very still. She called the vote. Elena had prepared herself for many versions of this meeting. She had prepared for hostility, the Council ordering the fleet to withdraw, the threat of force and the long, grinding machinery of diplomatic obstruction. She had prepared for bureaucratic delay, committees, subcommittees and requests for documentation that would take months to process. She had prepared, in her most private and least rational moments, for the possibility that the Council would simply not respond, that the greeting package would vanish into institutional silence, and that the fleet would sit on the threshold indefinitely while Elena aged and her daughter grew up without her. She had not prepared for the shuttle to arrive at the Umbra Ral within 6 hours of her message, carrying a single Dovari delegate named Ureth-san, who boarded without ceremony, looked at Elena with all 4 eyes simultaneously and said, show me what you found. Elena showed her. They stood together in the Umbra Ral's deep analysis chamber, a room that always felt to Elena like being inside a thought, the walls covered in data projections so dense it approached texture, and Elena walked Urethsan through everything. Not the sanitized version. Not the diplomatic package. The real data, the raw sensor readings, the internal reports, the arguments, the 6 months of analyst debate, the night recordings from Ganymede Station, and the quiet, terrible moment when the instruments had confirmed a response. Urethsan asked excellent questions. Precise questions. Not the questions of someone looking for reassurance but the questions of someone building an accurate internal model of a new reality. Halfway through she asked Elena to pause. This motion pattern, she said, pointing to a specific segment of the stillness's trajectory map. The curve. Does it remind your navigators of anything? Elena frowned. What do you mean? I mean, is it familiar? Does the shape of it match any natural phenomenon in your astronomical catalog? Elena thought about it. She had looked at that curve thousands of times. She had named it, analyzed it, and lost sleep over it. No, she said. We've run comparisons against every natural arc pattern we have. It doesn't match anything. Urethsan was quiet for a moment. Then, it matches something in ours. The room seemed to contract. In your catalog, Elena said carefully. In our classified catalog. Urethsan's tone was measured in a way that Elena recognized as the measured tone of someone who has just added a new room to a house they thought was complete. We have a designation for it. The formal name is long but the common term among analysts, it is not an official term. It emerged from practical use, is vorathine. In my language, it means approximately, the pace of a thing that has no reason to hurry. You've seen it before, Elena said. We have seen what we believe are records of it before, not in living memory but in archived observations from civilizations that are no longer active, civilizations that recorded certain anomalous motion patterns in their astronomical data and then, at some point, stopped making records. She paused. We have 7 such archives. Each from a different region of space. Each showing a similar pattern. Each ending. The silence that followed was not the silence of the council chamber's alkaloid air. It was the silence of 2 people standing on the same ground for the first time, looking at the same drop. You didn't tell anyone, Elena said. Not an accusation. An observation. We did not know what to say. Urethsan's secondary eyelids shifted. How do you tell the galaxy that there is evidence of something old and patient and possibly catastrophic when you have no proof, no mechanism, no explanation? Only a pattern in old data and the knowledge that the civilizations who recorded it are gone? She looked at Elena directly. How do you tell can people do something large without destroying the very cooperative framework that might be the only viable response? Elena thought of her daughter. Thought of the question, will they help us? You do it anyway, she said. You do it scared. You do it honestly. You build ships that are probably insufficient, fly them to those who might know more and say, we are afraid and we think you should know why. Urethsan looked at her for a long time. Yes, she said finally. I think that is what you do. The emergency session lasted 11 hours. Urethsan presented the findings jointly with Elena, an arrangement that had no precedent in council history, a fact that Delegate Voss raised formally 3 times before accepting that the chamber was not going to agree with him. Elena stood at the center projection space, which was designed for single-species presenters and was therefore slightly the wrong height for her, and she did not adjust it because she understood, with the particular social intelligence that had carried her from a research post in Patagonia to the bridge of humanity's most advanced warship, that the slight awkwardness made her more credible, not less. She was not performing comfortably. She was genuinely uncomfortable, and the council could see that, and it was the right thing for them to see. The Hethany and Dovari delegations were aligned immediately. Urethsan's account of the classified Vorathine archives had been relayed to council intelligence during the boarding session, and the Hethany Intelligence Service, which had, it emerged in the session, independently catalogued 2 of the 7 archives without ever connecting them to a unified phenomenon, was now sharing data in real time with Dovari analysts in a display of interagency cooperation that normally took months of formal protocol to initiate. The Merath delegation, Delegate Fuin and his 2 advisors, sat in deep vibrational consultation, their resonance collars switched to private frequency so that their exchange was felt by nearby delegates as a low background hum but not translated. When Fuin finally spoke to the chamber he said, the Merath homeworld is in the outer region, closer to the Ark's projected path than most. We have a specific interest in clarity. He looked at Elena. You said your ships cannot be detected. Can they go where we cannot? Yes, Elena said. Then the question, Fuan said, is not whether to engage with what Commander Vasquez has brought us. The question is how. He paused. And who leads? This was where the session fractured. Vasa's position, shared by 4 other delegations including the technically powerful Quellian Compact and the numerically significant Brashari plurality, was that the Council's response must be a Council operation, with all information centralized, all decision-making processed through existing governance structures, and the human fleet subordinated to Council command the moment they crossed the sovereignty threshold. The argument was reasonable. The Council had the resources, the experience, and the infrastructure. Collective action through established institutions was how the civilized galaxy operated. Individual member species taking unilateral action in response to existential threats was precisely the kind of dynamic that had produced most of the major catastrophes in Council history. Elena listened to this argument without expression. Then she said, "With respect, I'm not a member of the species." This produced a pause. "Earth is a monitored developing civilization," she continued. "Not a member. Not a subject. Not a protectorate. Monitored. Which means, by your own charter, you have no governance authority over our fleet." She let that land. "We came here voluntarily. We shared our data voluntarily. We are asking for partnership, and we are willing to operate under shared command structures that are mutually agreed upon. But we will not accept subordination to a governance structure that classifies us as something to be observed." Vasa's expression was, for the first time in the session, not skeptical. It was, Elena noted with careful interest, almost respectful. He had spent his career defending institutional structures, and he recognized someone making an argument about institutional principles rather than tactical advantage. "What are you proposing?" he asked. Elena looked at Urethsan. Urethsan gave a barely perceptible nod. "A new category," Elena said. "Not a member. Not monitored. Something without precedent because we're in a situation without precedent. A voluntary operational compact. Time-limited, mission-specific, dissolving when the mission concludes. Equal standing in the compact for all participating parties, regardless of Council classification." She paused. "And the mission's objective is not to defeat the stillness or contain it or destroy it. The objective is to understand it. And if understanding it reveals that it must be opposed?" Fuan asked. "Then we'll know what we're opposing," Elena said. "Which is better than the alternative." The vote was closer than Urethsan had hoped and wider than Vas had expected. The compact passed. 6 weeks into the joint mission, Dr. Yeva Marchetti, Elena's lead theoretical physicist, a 43-year-old woman from Thessaloniki who communicated primarily through white bards and had once gone 4 days without speaking because she was working through a proof she didn't want to interrupt, sent Elena a message that read simply, "Bridge. Now. Bring Urethsan." Elena had learned to take Yeva's brevity seriously. They found her in the analysis chamber, standing in front of a projection that had been assembled from combined human and Council data. 7 archived Vorathene patterns, the stillness's current trajectory, and something new. A predictive model that Yeva had built by running the Vorathene motion algorithm backward through the archived data until it resolved into a point of origin. The point of origin was not a location. It was a time. "How old?" Elena asked. Yeva said a number. The number was in years, and the number of years was sufficiently large that Elena's mind processed it the way human minds process astronomical distances, as a unit that was technically comprehensible and practically meaningless. Ancient beyond any analogy, it felt more like a gesture at infinity. Urethsan made a sound that was not in any language the Umber-Ral's translation systems recognized. Her secondary eyelids were completely closed. "The civilizations in the archives," she said quietly, "they did not disappear because the Vorathene destroyed them." Yeva looked at her. "No," she said. "They disappeared because the Vorathene finished," Yeva said. "The pattern doesn't end in catastrophe. It ends in completion. The archived recordings stopped because the civilization stopped recording, not because they stopped existing." She brought up the final frames of each archived dataset. "Look at the last entries. Every one of them. What do you see?" Elena looked. The final entries from each archived civilization's astronomical database were, she had to look several times to accept what she was seeing, not distress signals, not emergency records, not the hasty final transmissions of a collapsing society. They were careful, organized, almost formal. As if the civilization in question had concluded something, wrapped it up, and then, deliberately, stopped. "They stopped recording," Urethsan said slowly, "because there was nothing left to record about." "Not nothing," Yeva said. She was using her whiteboard voice now, the slow, precise voice she used when she was translating something from the language of mathematics into the language of human experience. The Vorathene is a survey, or the closest thing we have a concept for. It moves through a region, it observes everything in that region. Not just physically, the trajectory model suggests it's sampling at every scale, quantum to cosmic, and when the survey is complete, it generates something. She brought up the final component of her projection. In each archived civilization's last records, there's an anomaly in their local physics data. Small. Repeatable. Not natural. A marker. A marker, Elena said. Like a surveyor's pin, Yeva said. Like someone walked through and left a flag that says, "This was here." The chamber was hushed. They're not watching us to decide whether to destroy us, Elena said. Not a question. No, Yeva said. It's watching us because we're here, Yeva said simply. Because we exist. Because existence, in whatever framework operates at the scale of the Vorathene, is an event worth documenting. She looked at both of them, Elena and Ureth-san, with the expression she wore when a proof came out clean. Not triumphant. Satisfied in a deep and quiet way. We've been afraid of the wrong thing. It's not cataloging us for any purpose we have a word for. It's just recording. The way you write down the name of a place you visited. This is not because anything will be done with the record. Just because it was real and real things deserve to be acknowledged. Ureth-san's secondary eyelids opened slowly. The civilizations in the archives, she said. The ones who stopped recording. They didn't disappear. She was working through it, the same careful internal construction Elena recognized from her mind in the early days of the Stillness investigation. They stopped making astronomical records because they no longer needed to. Because the survey had been completed. Because the Vorathene had marked them. Her voice held something that was not quite awe and not quite grief and was very close to the Dovari concept that translated, imprecisely, as the feeling of being finally truly seen. And they knew. We can't know if they knew, Elena said carefully. No, Ureth-san agreed. But I believe, that when the marker is placed you feel it. However you are built. Whatever your sensory apparatus. I believe that the Vorathene records are not just physical. I believe it records the fact of consciousness. The fact of minds that exist in the universe and notice it and care about what they notice. She looked at Elena. I believe the civilizations in the archives stopped keeping records because they had been answered. Not with words. With acknowledgement. Elena thought about her daughter. About telling them we'll help back. About what it would mean if the thing they had been afraid of was not a predator, not a threat, not a force to be survived or opposed or understood in the way that useful things were understood. What it would mean if it was simply witness. We still don't know for certain, Elena said, because she was a scientist and she owed that to the process. No, Yeva said. But we know more than we did. And we know it together. She looked at the projection, human data and council data, woven together into something neither could have built alone. That seems like the right way to learn something this large. She wrote the letter at 0300 station time, when the Umbra Rawl was at its quietest and the wrong-looking stars outside the aperture had a particular quality of presence she had come to recognize as steadying rather than disorienting. She wrote it to her daughter. My love. I have been trying, since Ganymede, to find the right way to tell you about the thing we found. I told you they were watching us. I told you it was moving. I told you we didn't know what it wanted. I know more now. I am going to tell you something that will sound impossible, and I want you to sit with it until it stops sounding impossible and starts sounding true, the way the best things always do when you give them time. The thing at the edge of our sky is not a threat. It is not a weapon or a mind or a creature in any way you could draw or describe. It is something closer to what happens when the universe pays attention to itself. It moves like a river through a landscape, not because it wants to be anywhere but because it leaves a record of what it found. It found us. This means we are in the record now. Not the record of any species or government or institution, but some record we don't have a word for, made by something we can't communicate with, in a language none of us will ever read. But it is real. It is there. And it says, here were minds in this place in this time, who looked at the dark and were afraid and went anyway. You asked me to tell the people I met that we would help them in return. I told them. And here is the thing I discovered they already knew. Not about you, about all of us. About what it means to be afraid of something large and old and go toward it rather than away from it, because going toward it is the only way to understand it, and understanding it is the only thing that will actually help. The Council, these remarkable people from species you have never heard of, with names that take a moment to say and faces that look like nothing you have ever seen, They have been carrying a fear like ours for a long time. They found the pattern in old data and didn't know what to do with it. And they were so afraid of frightening everyone else that they said nothing. We said something. I don't think that makes us braver. I think it makes us newer. We hadn't had time yet to learn how to carry a fear silently, so we didn't. Sometimes I believe that being new can be a unique gift. The survey, the stillness, the Vorathene, or whatever name we finally settle on, will complete its circuit in approximately 55 years. When it's done, it will leave a marker. Not for us. Not for the Council. For whatever it is that eventually reads the record. And the record will say they were here. They were small and afraid, and they built ships that bent the rules of space, and they flew them to the edge of what they knew, and they asked for help. And it was given. Come home. Not yet. So, all my love always, Mom. She sealed the letter and sent it through the standard relay, which would deliver it to Earth in approximately 9 days. Then she went back to the aperture and looked at the wrong-looking stars, and for the first time since Ganymede Station, the wrongness did not feel like a warning. It felt like a fact she had finally stopped fighting. 3 months after the compact was formed, Delegate Voss made a motion in open session. It was not a motion anyone expected from him. His record was long and consistent. Preserve procedure, resist novelty, and trust institutional memory over individual intuition. He had voted against the compact. He had voted against Elena's operational presence on Thesavane Station. He had voted, in his long career, against more things than most delegates had voted for. The motion he made was this: that the Council formally establish a new classification category for civilizations that had demonstrated, in his careful bureaucratic phrasing, proactive existential transparency, meaning the willingness to share threat intelligence freely and without strategic reservation even when such sharing exposed tactical vulnerability. The motion included, embedded in its formal language, a clause that retroactively changed Earth's Council classification from developing civilization, monitored status to the new category. No one spoke for a long moment after the motion was read into the record. Then Sol said very quietly, "Seconded." The vote was unanimous. Elena was not in the chamber when it happened. She was in the analysis room with Yeva and a team of Hethany astronomers, running the latest trajectory models, doing the slow and careful work of understanding. Yureth-san sent her a message. It read, "You have been reclassified. I thought you should know. I also thought you might not care very much because that is the kind of person you appear to be, and I mean that as the highest possible compliment." Elena read it twice and then set her terminal down and went back to the trajectory models. Yureth-san was right. She didn't care very much. She cared about the work. It took 53 years, not 55. Elena was not alive to see it. She had lived a full life, returned home eventually, watched her daughter grow, worked as a civilian consultant on the Joint Human Council astronomical network that emerged from the compact, written 2 books and refused to write a third, and died at the age of 91 in a house in the mountains north of what had been Patagonia, with her daughter and her daughter's children in the next room. Her daughter was there when the alert came through. The survey had completed its circuit. The Vorathene, the term had been formalized by then, appearing in every major astronomical database in the explored galaxy, had returned to the point nearest Earth's solar system from which it had begun, and it had, in the final 12 hours of its circuit, done what Yeva's model had predicted. It had placed a marker. The marker was not visible. Not to conventional instruments. Not to the dark matter arrays that had been developed from Elena's original technology, now standard equipment on 300 vessels operated by 7 species. It wasn't found by the Hethany Smart Intelligence Systems, the Maratha's advanced sound sensors, or any of the monitoring tools that the United Civilizations had improved over 50 years. It was detected by a child. Elena's 12-year-old granddaughter, who had inherited her grandmother's particular quality of noticing things that were not quite wrong but not quite right either, was sitting in the astronomical observation post that had once been the Ganymede Station analysis room, now renovated, renamed, and somewhat more comfortable than when Elena first stood in it. The child did not have the instruments to characterize what she detected. She had, instead, something that the instruments lacked. She felt it. She sat with it for a long time, just as her grandmother had described in a letter her mother had shown her when she was 7 years old. She sat with it until it stopped feeling strange and started feeling true. Then she wrote it down. Something happened, she wrote. I don't know what. It felt like being looked at, and then it felt like being remembered. It didn't feel awful. It felt like being real. She sent the note to her mother, who sent it to the joint network, where it was received by analysts from 6 worlds who had been watching the same moment with every instrument available and who had detected nothing, and who read the child's 12 words and were quiet for a long time. Then they added it to the record. Part 12, Ubis Ymjish. Karo. That was what Ureth-san had said in the Dovari tongue, when Elena had first shown her the stillness data in the analysis chamber of the Umber Raw. It was not a word that translated cleanly into Council Standard or into English. The closest approximation the translation systems could produce was something like, "Now I understand why I did not understand before." It was not an admission of ignorance. It was not a statement of comprehension. It was the specific recognition of a mind encountering the precise scale of its own previous misunderstanding, not with shame but with something closer to relief. The relief of a map is becoming accurate. Elena had not known what the word meant when Ureth-san said it. She had asked later, and Ureth-san had tried to explain, and Elena had listened, and after a moment she had said, "We don't have a word for that. Maybe we should." Ymjhy. In the years after the compact, in the long, slow, careful years of joint work and shared data and the gradual, imperfect, genuine construction of something that might eventually deserve to be called understanding, Elena used the phrase as a personal marker. A private notation like a surveyor's pin, placed at moments when something she thought she knew turned out to be smaller than the reality it was trying to name. The realization dawned on her that the stillness held no threat. Ymjhy. When she understood that the Council's silence about the Vorathena archives had not been political cowardice but a very old fear of a very old kind, the fear of the thing that is true and important and impossible to say without breaking something. Ymjhy. When her daughter, age 7, said, "Tell them we'll help back," Elena understood, not in the moment but later, much later, in the mountains in the last years of her life, that this was the thing she had actually accomplished. Not the ships. Not the compact. Not the reclassification or the joint network or the 53-year watch on the Vorathene circuit. The thing she had accomplished was transmitting, across the gulf between species and the gulf between the known and the unknown, a child's instinct that help was not a resource to be rationed among the familiar but a direction to move in, outward, forward, toward whatever was large and strange and watching with open hands. Ymjhy. The universe was very old. It was much larger than any map. It contained, here and there in the dark, minds that looked at it and were afraid and looked at it anyway, and in looking became, very briefly, very temporarily, gorgeously, part of what it was. The Vorathene had recorded this. Somewhere, within the scale where these records resided, a notation existed. It did not say, "Here was a civilization that built ships no sensor could detect and crossed the threshold of the known galaxy and stood before the great council of species and was not afraid." It said, more precisely, in whatever language such things were said, "Here were minds. They were afraid. They went anyway. And when they arrived they said, 'We are afraid and we thought you should know why.' And because they said that, so did others. And because others said that, they were less alone. And because they were less alone, they were able to stay.